Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday, the 25th of July, and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. So, episode 367 and counting.
Still going up, still going up. We need to, and I know before the show we were just discussing some of the potential interviewees that we're going to get lined up to come on the podcast, and we've still got the industry leader that is yet to be confirmed, but is still committed to come on, aren't they?
Yeah, and you're right. Our hit list is looking pretty impressive. So we need to make some phone calls over the coming days. But we'll try and get some of those leaders on. But our recent interviews are still available on the website and on your podcast platform. So recent interviews have included Rob Lindley at Mitsubishi UK. That was a fascinating interview because he was talking about how the business went into lockdown and how it restarted itself, and also the supply of new cars, which is something we were particularly interested in. So definitely worth revisiting that if you haven't heard it. But other recent interviews still available are Clive Brook from Clive Brook Volvo, Mike Jones from ASE, Darren Martin from Cap HBI, and Sebastian Fuchs from Mannheim Europe.
Yeah, and I say, there's it's still worth listening to those interviews because it's very insightful. And actually, as we come out of the lockdown period, that's where you can start to relate to some of the things they were talking about in some of those more earlier interviews, can't you? In terms of how they've operated, how we're seeing the market recovery, and how we're starting to see that pent-up demand. And it will be interesting, actually, through the sort of third and fourth quarter to try and get some of these people back on again. And just to see how their startups and recovery went, and how the market's looking for them now. So hopefully we can do that in the coming quarters and revisit some of these guys and see what did happen as the lockdown was lifted.
Yes, and do you want to know what I've been doing?
I know what you've been doing.
Skill.
You've been practicing your website building. You have got a new skill, and you've spent a lot of time on your platform, haven't you?
I have indeed, yeah. So my new lockdown skill is building a website from the ground up, which I thought was going to be a lot easier than it was. So I was using the WordPress platform. So anyone familiar with WordPress will know that it's made up of templates. So you basically choose your template and populate it. Well, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
But I must say they had a brilliant live chat function. So every time I got stuck, I was able to go onto live chat, and some bright young person was able to point me in the right direction and correct any mistakes I'd made. So it's up and running. So it is CurtisHutchinsonCommunications.com. That may not be that catchy, but it is Google friendly, so it is popping up in Google now, and it's basically a roundup of what I've been doing since leaving Motor Trader. So the sort of PR services that I'm offering companies in the industry, content writing, and indeed doing things like forums, hosting forums. So if you are interested, head over there.
I mean, I remember our conversations when you were thinking of doing what you did. And in those early days, those scary early days, should we say, Curtis, you were leaving, or you were looking at going out on your own and whether you should do it and everything like that. And now, obviously, looking back, you've got a new skill. You've, like you say, you're hosting some webinars and everything else. I mean, who'd have looked back now and just said, look, where would you have been and what are you doing now? And it's fantastic, and those that ever think about doing it, then you're a testament that it can be done.
Yes, yeah, and I'm so glad I did it when I did it rather than doing it at the beginning of this year, which would have been a bigger challenge.
Exactly. So we've got a host of headlines this week, haven't we? Again, we've had to be a little bit selective because there's no slowdown in the market, as we know, is there?
No, so headlines this week are from Motor Trader, Car Dealer, AM Online, and The Times. And we'll start in a minute with an update on dealer sentiment based on new research I know you guys have been doing at Cox Automotive. We'll take a look at how warranty sales have enjoyed a post-lockdown bounce, why car dealership sites are being sought for redevelopment for anyone who's thinking of getting out of this business. We've got the latest on used car trends with the VRA reporting high demand for retail-ready used cars, and also Arnold Clark enjoying a strong restart, again on the used car side of their business. Plus, we've got to look at VW's dealer-based car rental service. So, lots of headlines to cover.
Lots going on, isn't there? Lots going on.
Yeah, so the first one is from Motor Trader, and the headline is "Employee health and cash flow are biggest concerns for dealers." So this is based on some research, as I said, that you guys did at Cox Automotive, really seeing what the dealer sentiment is at the moment and what their priorities are. And you found that it really is down to employee health. That is the main issue, isn't it? That dealers are addressing ahead of things like cash flow, which obviously remains very important.
Yeah, and I think that's the key with this. As you say, the findings were that, as you would expect, the health of both the customers and the colleagues and employees of businesses still is paramount for any business at the minute, and we know that from some of the interviews that we've done, as we mentioned right at the start of this. But interestingly, it's cash flow that is the second priority as businesses come out of lockdown and work their way through the sort of current and remainder of 2020. And interestingly enough, that came second, as I say, behind the health of employees. But actually, access to capital was last. So it was about managing that cash flow. And I think interestingly that a lot of the conversations across the network with senior executives and industry leaders, it's all about that planning. There's been a lot of talk around transparency, and we know that in, let's say, the interviews that we did throughout the lockdown, in the early days of lockdown, where you had the conversations with the Robert Forresters, Dash Guptas, and others across the network about that communication, transparency of communication was happening a lot, and we know that in terms of sharing knowledge, but actually the analysts are sort of advising the businesses at the minute that actually, budget planning is priority, and you need to be doing a 3-month budget and rolling it on every single month, and really keeping on top of those operational costs and processes on a daily basis at the minute. And there's been suggestions that they should have a team of people that actually revisit the budget on a regular basis and keep a close eye on obviously the cash flow of the business and the operational income of the business, and that seems to be paramount.
Yeah, absolutely right, and I'm pretty sure that's something that Mike Jones touched on when we had him on as a guest recently, talking about those sort of 3-month rolling budgets.
And Owen mentioned it as well, didn't he? From Grant Thornton, that was the Grant Thornton. It was that keep an eye on cash flow, because I think over this next quarter is paramount as people come off furlough, and we're not sure what happens going forward. It is key for any business.
Yeah, and within the story, I thought it was interesting about dealers talking about when they expect to return to profit, whether or not it'll be this year. So 43% said they do expect to return to profit this year, which I must admit I thought was very positive, because that would have been higher than I would have anticipated. A third said they don't, and 24% were unsure.
Yeah, and again, referring back to previous interviews, in particular the most recent one with Clive Block from Clive Block Volvo, that the overhead absorption that he was talking about and the trade profit that we were talking about in the month of June, and a lot of these guys have actually recovered a lot of their losses in the month of June, and hopefully we'll see that again in July. For some of that downturn throughout sort of April and May. So, there is an opportunity there. The question at the minute is how long that will last for, and it depends how tightly controlled those businesses were before we went into this period of lockdown, and some of those sort of balance sheet management and costs coming into businesses, how those were coming into 2020 essentially, that some of them may have been struggling already coming into the year before being faced with COVID-19. So there is a good opportunity for many businesses that they will recover, and as we've always said, the market might be consolidating, but actually hopefully at the end of it, those that remain in the market will be more profitable. And one of the stories we're talking about today is about people leaving the sector, but obviously hopefully that those that do decide will be a more profitable business as a consequence.
Yeah, and the next story from AM Online, the headline is warranty sales 21.4% up on 2019 in post-lockdown bounce back. So we're now starting to see what's happened since the beginning of June. So this is some research that was carried out by RAC Dealer Network, and as I say, they found that in the last 6 weeks, warranty sales were actually up 21.4%, and that's year on year. So that's comparing with this time, same period in 2019. And this is generated. This is really based on stats from their network of it's about 1,500 retailers, and they're now finding that the warranty business is almost the same as it was in the pre-lockdown levels, comparing with February and March. So a really strong bounce back there for warranty sales, which I would suspect is reflected across the industry. It isn't just the RAC Dealer Network.
No, exactly. And yesterday the figures came out around retail sales spending, and there has been recovery in many areas, not all areas, as we know. Many are still down, but there has been that recovery through petrol sales, clothing sales. Food sales, as we know, has been fairly stable all the way through for obvious reasons of the lockdown. But again, we are seeing a recovery in certain areas and not other areas. So the big question that we're all asking, and we've spoke about it with a majority of the interviews, is how long this pent up demand will last for. And I think you mentioned it previously, Curtis, on one of the podcasts around this. Very difficult at the minute because we're out of normal seasonality to do a like for like, year on year, month on month comparison. Because we've in many cases we've had no activity through both April and May.
Yeah, it's kind of snookered us for the next year or so, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've been talking about the 2007, 2008 recession for so long now that at least we've got something else to talk about and
the good old days.
For the future.
The good old days.
Yes. So we are returning over to Car Dealer Mag, and sort of we did reference this a little bit earlier. It's probably got a connection with the earlier story, but dealership site sought in 100 million initiative by retirement homes builder. So this is something to somebody looking at taking opportunities if they arise to increase their portfolio of retirement homes if anybody within the automotive sector decide they want to exit.
Yeah, so this story is about McCarthy and Stone. So they're the retirement community developer and manager, and they have this £100 million war chest, and they're looking for properties to buy and convert into retirement homes, and they say they're looking for 60 or more sites around the UK, and that they are looking at dealerships as part of that. The criteria that, if anyone's interested, who's listening to today, the criteria they're looking for is the site has got to be between half an acre and 5 acres, and it's got to be close to local shops. So if you fit that criteria and you're considering an exit strategy, then get in touch.
Yeah, I mean, what is it? They're looking at 60 or more sites, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's obviously somebody's got some money to spend at the minute and taking opportunity there. But again, I suppose the good thing is it's if there is anybody looking at exiting, then it's utilising that property if it does fit their requirements. So we'll keep an eye on this one. It'll be interesting to see what happens with keep an eye on this McCarthy and Stone's portfolio and see if it does start to increase over the coming months following their announcement. What do you think?
Well, yeah, definitely. We'll keep tabs on this one, and give any updates if we hear anything.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, it kind of does fit with some of the strategies of the OEMs, doesn't it? That they are looking at reducing their dealer network, and I'm sure some people have already left the network or are thinking of leaving the network as a consequence of COVID-19. But again, they've got to fit the requirement on this. So
definitely, and the timing is spot on because it's very much in response to the government's call to get the construction sector restarted to help boost the economy. So it is very timely, this.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group, the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector, and available online at motortraderadio.com and by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Deezer, and SoundCloud.
Yep, you got them all now there. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Yep. So the next story, we're going back over to AM Online, and this is from the VRA and Sam Watkins, who's the chair of the VRA there, and this is around the retail ready used car stock boost dealers race to COVID-19 recovery. And again, you can kind of see where a lot of the OEMs, a lot of the dealers, a lot of the vendors, a lot of the captive finance companies are looking at obviously streamlining where possible and utilising that retail ready environment to make sure, because it's all about efficiencies, it's all about return on investment these days, and that's the key with a lot of this, to maximise that return on investment. Many dealers now don't necessarily, they haven't necessarily got the contacts, or the contacts aren't there these days for cost-effective refurb of vehicles, and looking at utilising it where they can get that car on site, ready to retail, and reduce their days in stock and maximise the return.
Yeah, and this is a sign of the times as we come out of lockdown, because it's showing that there is now high demand from dealers who need to replenish their stock, because they've been selling well, as we've reported in so many different stories. They've been selling well since the beginning of June across the UK.
Yeah, and again, it's a case of the vendors, OEMs, and say there with captive finance, etc., looking at getting those vehicles through the system onto the market and up for sale as quickly and efficiently as possible, and whether that is taking a vehicle from a grade 3 to a grade 2 or grade 2 to a grade 1 in terms of the NAMA grading, and maximise that return on investment for that vehicle. So it's kind of this move that has been coming, but I think it's certainly been accelerated through COVID-19.
Yeah, and this links neatly with the next story, which is from The Times, and the headline is "Used Car Sales Accelerate in Lockdown Reveals Arnold Clark." So let's just give this a bit of context, because dealerships in Scotland reopened right at the end of June. I think it was June 28th. So they're now starting to report their first few weeks of business. And Arnold Clark, Scotland's largest dealer, has reported a 20% rise in used sales in July compared to the same period last year. So that's year on year, with high demand in particular for smaller used cars. And Eddie Hawthorne's interviewed, he's the boss of Arnold Clark, he's interviewed in the story, and he's saying that they're noticing demand from customers moving away from public transport, which is something we've covered before on the podcast as a trend. And also, interestingly, people deciding to buy a car this year instead of going on holiday. So they suddenly find that money they budgeted for a holiday is now available, and maybe good time to buy a used car. And interestingly, the biggest increase in terms of demand for the price range, a car's priced between £8,000 and £15,000.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, that is the problem. Is everybody wants those vehicles now,
Yeah,
and that's where the peak is through wholesale and valuations on that kind of product, because it is optimum sort of 10 to £15,000 retail pricing position, and that's where you can see that, and it would have been interesting because obviously Alna Clark's obviously didn't have the full opportunity of having the full month of June, as we know, did they? For Scotland, because obviously Scotland did open later than in England, but luckily, as you said in the story there, that they do have representation across England as well as Scotland, so they did manage to maximise some revenue from the month of June. A little bit more than up in Scotland there, so great. I mean, fantastic, and but they do mention obviously about the job redundancies and their reduction, and it kind of aligns with the story we talked about a couple of weeks back with Virtue Motors, wasn't it? Because I think Robert talked about 6% of his workforce that they were facing redundancy.
Yeah, and Eddie Hawthorne's talking about 5%, which is around 600 jobs there, and that's from a 12,000 head count. And he does say that they're looking at that through natural wastage.
I think it's never good for talking about redundancies at all. But I think when in the early days of the lockdown, there were sort of numbers being thrown around, but they expect to see 20 to 30% redundancies across the network. There were some headlines out, weren't there, in the early days. So, the two sort of leading AM100 operators there, talking about 5 and 6%. It's kind of positive that it isn't as high as the double-digit 25 to 30% mark.
Yeah, although I guess we're not out of the woods yet, because we've still got the furlough period to run until October, and we're likely to see more over that time frame as well.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about before the podcast, weren't we? That whilst the furlough is in place, it will be comfort for many businesses and employees, won't it? So I do suspect that as we come out of furlough, there could be others that we'll start to see, but fingers crossed, not too bad. But you mentioned this story right at the start here, and quite an interesting one, really, because as you referenced there, Curtis, that it kind of continues this move from OEMs and their appetite to enter this sector. And this is a story that has appeared on AM Online, and this is, as you say there, that Volkswagen rent-a-car service rolled out at Pullman VW in Durham, and this is kind of an intention from VW to go into that sector.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it's being rolled out now, because I guess there must have been a temptation to just sort of hold back on launching new services, just get used car sales, new car sales up and running again, after sales and everything else. So this is a bold move, and I suspect we'll be seeing more of these. So as you say, it's a rent-a-car service which customers can rent on a daily basis, weekends, and other short-term rentals up to 28 days, with flexible rental options for even longer terms. And this is part of Volkswagen's strategy. So it was announced fairly recently, and it really is seeing a rollout of this service across dealerships throughout the UK.
And interestingly, I mean, there is a kind of a mention to Drover in the story, but not necessarily connected to the rollout of this product. But in this same kind of week recently, that UK's Drover has raised $26 million to take its car subscription market into Europe. And obviously we know that Drover have got connections with some of these European and international OEMs. So again, it kind of aligns with what you've just been talking about there, Curtis.
Yeah. So, if we thought subscriptions had gone quiet, we can expect to see a lot more now over the coming months.
Yeah, so again, we'll see what happens there, and I think there's probably a lot more. There's acceleration. I think a lot of people felt that this whole mobility as a service and subscription model might actually slow down from an investment perspective because of COVID-19, but it's the exact opposite. There's two stories there that actually shows an acceleration of intent to do that mobility service and vehicle subscription model straight out of the restriction lift of COVID-19. So I expect more to come from this one.
Yeah, although I guess the jury's still out on car sharing.
Yeah, it might not be the right time now, but yeah, there's a few other challenges there in the minute with sanitisation and things like that, but one that we watch. So again, lots of headlines here, lots to look at. Again, always advise you to pop over to some of the medias that we've mentioned there. Plenty more stories and updates that they are releasing on a regular basis. Still a lot of happening in the sector, and we're still in the early days of restriction lift, and we eagerly awaiting the results from July new car registrations, which on site, from what I've had sight of so far, is looking fairly positive from a private registrations perspective. I suppose the question is whether that is still orders from pre-lockdown and during lockdown, or is it actually activity post-lockdown? But private registrations looks to be very positive, albeit fleet is still of a challenge for obvious reasons, as we spoke to on the podcast. So hopefully next weekend we'll have some more figures that we can talk about on there, if not the week after. So lots to come from us so far.
Yeah, so unfortunately that's all for this week. You've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Do join Philip and I again next weekend for our review of the headlines, and do look out for the latest in our series of special interviews with industry leaders and analysts. So until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.